There are 17 elements on the periodic table that dictate the velocity of 21st century civilization. Without them, the gears of the modern world don't just slow down, they seize. Instantly. The flight control surfaces of an F-35, the high coercivity magnets in a Tesla drive unit, and the massive H100 clusters scaling the next LLM. They all share a singular, unmitigated metallurgical dependency. Vulnerability baked into their very hardware. This isn't just about raw extraction, it's about midstream dominance. While the West focused on software margins, China achieved vertical integration, capturing 90% of global refining capacity. In the language of asymmetric warfare, this is the ultimate kill switch. From the Silicon Valley C-suite to the Pentagon's procurement offices, the realization is finally setting in. We are in a conflict where the primary weapon isn't a missile, it's a magnet. This is deep future. The rare earth war. To understand the leverage, you have to look at the lanthanides. These elements possess unique 4f electron shells, providing the magnetic moments and photonic properties that allow us to miniaturize power. But the barrier to entry isn't just dirt, it's the massive capex and chemical complexity of processing them. Let's talk about neodymium iron boron, or NdFb. It is the gold standard of high-density energy storage in magnetic form. We are looking at a crystalline structure that offers the highest saturation magnetization known to man. Without this specific metallurgical lattice, the miniaturized electric motors in your Tesla or your iPhone's haptic engine would be twice the size and half as efficient. This isn't just a commodity, it's the fundamental physics of modern mobility. But neodymium has a thermal ceiling. Enter dysprosium. It's the heavy, rare earth that prevents magnets from demagnetizing under high heat stress. If you're building a Pratt & Whitney engine for an F-35 or a 15 megawatt offshore wind turbine, dysprosium is your insurance policy. Without it, the system fails at operational temperatures. China currently controls nearly 100% of the world's heavy rare earth separation capacity. That is a metallurgical chokehold. Silicon Valley has a massive hardware blind spot. We obsess over H100 GPUs and CUDA kernels, but the physical infrastructure of AI, the high-pressure liquid cooling pumps and the precision robotics in the data centers relies entirely on these lanthanides. As we scale the power requirements for AGI, the capital expenditure isn't just in the chips. It's in the magnets that move the heat and the hardware. We are building the future on a foundation we don't own. Section 2. The long game. While the West was drunk on the peace dividend of the 90s, Deng Xiaoping was looking at the periodic table. In 1992, while America was transitioning to a service economy, Beijing was pivoting toward resource hegemony. They didn't see rare earths as a trade good, they saw them as the ultimate asymmetric weapon for the next century. The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. That wasn't just a quote. It was a corporate state doctrine. For 30 years, they absorbed the environmental costs and the low-margin chemistry of separation that the West refused to touch. They weren't just mining, they were out-planning us. Now, the strategic leverage once held by OPEC has shifted from the oil field to the refinery. In the 1980s, California's Mountain Pass was the global epicenter of rare earth production, but Western capital markets operate on quarterly cycles, not decades. Faced with stringent environmental regulatory friction and Molycorp's bankruptcy, the US surrendered its lead. We traded mineral sovereignty for low-cost procurement, effectively offshoring our strategic industrial base. This brings us to Section 3, the ESG Paradox. While Silicon Valley boards prioritize high ESG scores and carbon-neutral narratives, the physical reality of the hardware tells a much darker story. The West didn't just outsource manufacturing. We outsourced the ecological fallout of the high-tech age. Bayan Obo, Inner Mongolia. This is the cost of your lithium-ion transition. What you're seeing are massive tailing ponds, vast, toxic lakes of thorium-laced sludge and sulfuric acid. This is the brutal chemistry of solvent extraction required to isolate the elements that make your Tesla's motor spin. The irony is systemic. To achieve a green revolution in the West, we've effectively externalized the environmental degradation to the East. It is a massive supply chain arbitrage. We claim moral superiority in decarbonization while relying on a process that creates radioactive wastelands elsewhere. Now, let's dismantle a myth. Section 4. The refining chokehold. The term rare earth is a geological misnomer. Neodymium is actually more abundant in the Earth's crust than copper or zinc. The scarcity isn't the ore itself, it's the hyper-specialized metallurgical capacity to refine it to 99.9% purity. To understand the bottleneck, you have to understand the chemistry. Rare earths aren't actually rare, they're just difficult to isolate. We're talking about solvent extraction, a grueling, multi-stage process involving hundreds of tanks where lanthanides are separated based on infinitesimal differences in chemical affinity. It's an environmental and logistical nightmare that most Western firms simply won't touch. China's real advantage isn't just the dirt. It's the IP moat. Over the last 30 years, Beijing has optimized the hydrometallurgy of these elements to a degree that makes our current tech look like alchemy. They hold the patents on the specific chemical reagents and the thermal gradient profiles required for high purity yields. We aren't just behind on mining, we're behind on the fundamental science of separation. Why hasn't Silicon Valley disrupted this? Because the economics are a VC's worst nightmare. Rare earth refining is capital expenditure heavy, with low margins and a decade-long path to profitability. When you compare that to the 80% margins of a SaaS startup, the iron law of hardware wins every time. Our capital markets are optimized to bits, but the geopolitical war is being won in atoms. Section 5. The proof of concept. In 2010, the theory of rare earth weaponization became reality. A maritime skirmish near the Senkaku Islands between a Chinese fishing trawler and the Japanese Coast Guard triggered the first true shot in the modern tech war. It wasn't a missile, it was a memo. Beijing didn't issue a formal decree. They used an unofficial quota system, quietly halting all shipments of rare earth oxides to Japan. Within weeks, the Japanese high-tech sector, the global leader in magnets and electronics at the time, went into a state of total paralysis. This was the first time the world realized that high-performance hardware had a kill switch, and Beijing held the finger on the button. The 2010 embargo was a proof of concept. Neodymium spot prices spiked 20% within a fiscal quarter. For Western boardrooms, this wasn't just a supply shock. It was the realization that the entire just-in-time manufacturing model had been decapitated by a single metallurgical choke point. But the corporate profit and loss is only the preamble. We are now entering Section 6, kinetic dependency. We're moving beyond the silicon wafer and into the Pentagon's ultimate nightmare, the total weaponization of the periodic table. Consider the F-35 Lightning II, the most sophisticated multi-role fighter in history. A $500 billion investment in American air superiority, but beneath its stealth coating lies a structural vulnerability that no radar can detect. Strip it down. Each airframe requires 920 pounds of rare earth elements. We're talking samarium cobalt magnets for the actuators and neodymium for the radar arrays. Every single jet is an assembly of materials processed almost exclusively within Chinese borders. Without them, the F-35 is just a $100 million static display. The rot goes deeper. Virginia-class submarines, Tomahawk missiles, precision-guided munitions, the entire U.S. kill chain is upstream-dependent on a geopolitical rival for its fundamental magnetism and thermal resistance. This is not a supply chain. It is a structural siege. In the doctrine of asymmetric warfare, kinetic engagement is a failure of strategy. Why risk a carrier strike group when you can execute a regulatory interdiction? If Beijing halts dysprosium and neodymium exports tonight, the U.S. Air Force sustainment rate enters a terminal decay. No dogfights, no stealth sorties, just grounded titanium skeletons waiting for magnets that will never arrive. This isn't a trade war. It's a silent siege of the physical layer. Section 7. The scramble for kinetic sovereignty. We are witnessing a frantic, state-sponsored injection of capital into Mountain Pass, California. The Pentagon has pivoted from customer to venture capitalist, deploying hundreds of millions in Title III DPA funds to rebuild a domestic metallurgical base. But mining is the easy part. Reclaiming the chemistry of refining the black box of rare earth processing is a multi-decade capex mountain we've only just started to climb. The countermove is friend-shoring. Australia's Lynas Rare Earths has become the strategic linchpin, acting as the only major producer of separated rare earths outside China. By bridging Australian ore with refining capacity in Texas, the Five Eyes are attempting to build a parallel supply chain. However, displacing a 30-year monopoly requires more than just alliances. It requires an industrial decoupling that the global markets aren't yet priced for. Silicon Valley ignores the hardware bottleneck at its own peril. You cannot build the physical manifestation of AGI, the autonomous robotics, the high-performance cooling for H100 clusters, or the precision sensors for edge computing if the raw material inputs are weaponized. We are chasing a software-defined future while our adversary controls the atoms required to run it. Without metallurgical independence, your AGI roadmap is a hallucination. The verdict is cold. Time is a commodity we cannot mine. The US is playing a game of catch-up on a board where the rules were written by the opposition decades ago. Will we accept the massive economic and environmental costs of true independence or remain a vassal to a foreign supply chain? The window for a soft landing is closing. Subscribe to Deep Future as we track the decoupling of the global stack. The future is physical.